Hi, and happy Wednesday. We're going to get into chapter 3 of Flight from Death. I apologize in advance. It seems that my upstairs neighbor is home. He's a bit loud. Actually, he's very loud. So if you hear him, well, welcome to another piece of my wonderful life. Anyway, let's dive right in. Last we left off, they were on their way to Port Townsend. So, let's see. Our route took us up to I-5 to Mukilteo, where we would take the ferry over to Whidbey Island. From there, we'd drive up to the other end of the island to Coopville, where we would catch another ferry to Port Townsend. There were other routes, but this seemed the most expedient. I know the devil is in the details, but I didn't tell Alex that I'd forgotten to check out the schedule. I knew most of the Washington State ferries had late sailing, so we shouldn't have any problem. North of Seattle, western Washington opened out a little. Oh, the forest was still there, but the land felt more like shoreline, with windswept trees and bushes. To the east of the freeway, once we were north of Seattle, a long stretch of rolling berry farms lined the road. To the west, Edmonds, a small town with a vintage feel, led into Everett, which was solidly Navy. Past Everett came Mukilteo, named after a Native American word thought to stem from the meaning good camping ground, or, alternatively, narrow passage. Continue north, and the road wound through Bellingham and onto the Canadian border. I really hope this information is relevant. I really hope so. Otherwise, if you're visiting Washington, well, there you go. Now you know where to go. I'd never been up this way. Hell, I had seen very little of Earthside. So as Alex drove, Ralph played tour guide. The sun was long gone, even though we decided to take off at 7 since we wanted to make it over to Port Townsend before midnight. As we exited the freeway onto Highway 526, also known as the Boeing Freeway, Ralph leaned forward over the back of my seat. He was a good kid, though I knew he wasn't all that young, but compared to me, he was a baby. Ralph was lanky and lean, and he wore round, dark-tinted glasses in the style of John Lennon. Shorter than both Alex and me, he topped out at 5'8" at the most, and he tended to dress in cargo pants, t-shirts, and sneakers. Typical sidekick clothing. Brilliant. He was also a genuinely nice guy. And he had a crush on me. I knew it. Bet knew I knew. Alex knew I knew. The only person who didn't realize I knew, it was Ralph himself. And I prefer to keep it that way. Less awkward in having to turn him down if he made a move. Because, as sweet as he was, Ralph was not my type. So I grew up around here. I lived in Everett until I was 10, and my father moved us to Seattle. He brushed back a lock of unruly black hair. Alex flashed a quick glance over his shoulder at Ralph. I didn't know that. When was that? Oh, 60 years ago, give or take. The area was a lot less crowded then. My father found a job down on the docks in Seattle where he got out of the military. He was in the army during World War II, you know. After that, when he decided to settle down, he had to age himself up with glamour magic that he bought from a witch. That was before the humans knew we existed. He laughed softly. I remember the first time, 5 or 6 years ago? I remember the first day when he felt like it was safe to come out of the closet and he went to work without the makeup. The guy was spooked, but since he'd worked with them for so many years, it didn't take long before they accepted him. They didn't tell us what he is. Oh, okay. Where's age the same as humans until they hit young adulthood? Sorry, lapse of memory. And then the process slowed dramatically. The longevity factor made some hard feelings among a few humans, but the otherness was far more problematic. There were hate groups actively out to kill the Wares and the Fae and vampires. That sucks. But there's always people trying to kill others. It's just how humans work. I glanced back at him. Where did you go before it was safe to come out as a were? Did you use magic to age yourself? He shook his head. No, I spent the 60s doing construction, and I job hopped a lot. During the 70s, I got fascinated by the emerging computer market. I supported myself through temporary jobs while going to school. In 1989, I got hired on by Microsoft. I came out of the closet when I moved to Google in 2007. 2 years back, I quit to open my own consulting company. Shortly after that, I met Alex and decided it would be more fun to work with him. I don't really need the money. I got in on the ground floors of both of the giants and made a killing, but I like keeping busy and I have control of the entire network. Listening to him talk wiped away some of the geek boy image. Ralph was a full-on professional in his field, though he still looked and acted like a shy college student. The details. We took a right, keeping on Highway 526, and shortly after, another right onto Highway 525. The highway would turn into the I've been saying it wrong. Mukilteo Speedway and lead us right to the ferry landing. As we sped along, a sign for the ferry lane came into view. The shoulder was dedicated to those waiting to board, and during peak times it would be filled several sailings worth of cars, all lined up single file along the roadside. Trees and houses buttressed the speedway, but here homes weren't packed close together, and they didn't directly sit on the edge of the street. The two-lane road was covered in mist, slick with rain, and our headlights cut through the rolling fog like a dim laser. As the ferry lane became the ferry traffic only lane, we edged into it. We're almost there. Looks like we lucked out and missed the backups that happen around this time of night. Alex hadn't spoken much, but then he wasn't a talkative guy. Ralph's nose was back into his phone or iPad or whatever it was he was doing. I've never been on a ferry, but it has to do with the water. You can bet I'm going to like it. I paused as the road began to slope down on a stronger gradient. Up ahead, the first traffic light we'd seen in a while glowed through the mist and rain. Just beyond it, in the distance, I could see the faint glint of water, but even more, I could feel it. Open water. I really hope something happens. I really, really hope something happens. My spirits rose, and I rolled down my window to breathe in the scent of brine and seaweed and decay. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood. The scent of it intoxicated me in a heady, welcome-home manner. Suddenly aware of how much I'd missed this, I practically bounced in my seat like a little kid. You can hear her, can't you? She's singing to you. Alex glanced at me as he navigated the road. No diving overboard when we're on the ferry, mind you. Once we reach Port Townsend, you can go and take a swim. I promise. The thought that by tomorrow I'd be out swimming in my dragon form made me so happy that right now I would have promised just about anything. As the road sloped even further, I could see the water, even through the dark of the evening. At that point, Alex turned to the right into what appeared to be a giant parking lot guarded by 3 toll booths. He pulled up to one that had an open sign on it and smiled to the woman in the booth. 2 passengers besides me, heading for Clinton Ferry. 1850, please. She took his credit card, swiped it, and then handed it back. Next sailing is in 15 minutes. Park in lane B, please. Why is there so much detail? We eased into the lane, which was empty, parking up at the front. Lane A was full. Across the street from us was an Ivers, and to the right of the restaurant, the Silver Cloud Inn, directly on the water's edge. To the left, beyond Lane A, was an intersection. Left of the intersection was an alehouse and what looked like another hotel. The road leading straight ahead jogged around Ivers to lead to the ferry terminal. The ferry was in, and they were unloading the last of the cars and foot traffic from the sailing. And Alex turned off the engine. They'll probably start boarding us in 5 minutes. They tend to be fairly prompt on sailing times. There are bathrooms aboard, so unless you have to pee really bad right now, stay in the car. I went before we left. Ralph's nose was still buried in whatever he was reading. What are they, kids? I strained to catch a glimpse of the water, but from here the buildings and other cars blocked my view. How long is the trip? This run? Not long, 15 minutes, maybe 20. It's not as long as some of them. Alex greeted me. You're excited, I can tell. Well, yeah. I paused and ducked my head, returning a smile. You don't know what it's like being a water dragon stuck in a city. At least Seattle's on Puget Sound. But Puget? Puget? But I haven't gotten up the courage to find an area where I can dive in and shift form. I'm just a little out of my element still, in more ways than one. Alex nodded, his voice softened. Well, when we get back home after this trip, I promise you we'll find a safe place for you to swim. I know several private coves where you can probably find water deep enough. The way his voice curled around the words made me think he was offering me more than just a friendly outing. I glanced at him sideways, trying to gauge just what to say with Ralph in the car. Flickering my eyes downward toward the back seat, I hoped Alex would catch my drift. You like to swim, then? He held my gaze for a moment, then slowly inclined his head as though he understood my meaning. You might say that. When I was alive, I was a fairly good swimmer. I had to learn early on. What say we talk this over later? Again the smooth caress of his voice over the words, and my stomach took a leap into my throat. I think I'd like that. A shiver ran down my back as I wondered what I was getting myself into, but my mouth seemed to have a mind of its own, and right now it was slamming the door on the caution sign, flashing desperately in the back of my mind. Good girl. Alex turned the key and started the ignition. We're ready to roll. Good girl? Really? She basically told him she wanted to have sex with him, and he get... Oh, I don't like that. No. The ferry guard, I wasn't sure what his full title was, had motioned for people to start their engines. He was blocking off traffic in the street as he motioned for the cars in lane A to file through to the ferry terminal. Before long, we joined the queue. As we drove onto the ferry, we ended up next to the edge on the lower level. Alex turned off the ignition and motioned to the railing. Come on, let's take a walk around the boat. Ralph, you want to join us? Nope, I've got my book. Ralph seemed oblivious, immersed in he was on in his whatever he was on his e-reader. What? Both Ralph and Alex were big readers, and while I was getting used to the format, in the Dragon Reaches you read but for different reasons, I hadn't really connected with the concept of storytelling yet, but it was growing on me. I opened my door and stepped out. The ferry was huge, but apparently there were bigger ones that traveled through these waters. I crossed to the side of the ferry, stepping up on the wide side step and leaning onto the railing. Alex joined me. How many cars does this boat carry? Over 100 cars. There's an elevator to the main cabin and bathrooms on both levels. Do you want to go up to the cabin to watch from there? He stared out over the water as the ferry began to chug its way out into the Sound. Okay, because if one of you guys takes a trip to Washington, now you know where the bathrooms are. You know you'll be able to get on the ferry. You know how to do it, and you know how much it'll cost you. I thought about it, but then shook my head. I'd rather stay here, feel the wind on my face, and smell the water, you know. The side of the ferry was low enough so that we could stand against it, leaning on the rail and watch over the water. I stared into the darkness, all too aware of Alex's presence beside me. But then the glint of the water shone under the lights of the boat, and the gentle rocking caught me up. I loved the feeling of motion. I loved dancing, running, swimming, sex, anything that set my body to moving. The waves were so close that I almost reached them, and the feeling of deep water, not ocean deep, but deep enough, rushed over me like a wave. As the ferry chugged across Puget Sound, I stood rapt, caught in the soothing embrace of the Water Mother's song. My nostrils flared as I caught the scent of kelp and brine. I leaned forward, staring at the ripples of water that rolled beneath the boat, longing to spread my arms wide and dive so deep that I never needed to come up. The water was a sensuous lover, all-embracing, all-encompassing. It strengthened me and made me feel whole. Inhaling deeply, I straightened my shoulders, feeling my energy rise from the close proximity. Shimmer? Alex's voice intruded, low and sultry. I turned to find him staring at me. Alex? I slid my hand along the rail toward him. The air felt so thick it was like breathing vapor. He held my gaze as he reached out to place his hand over mine, his skin ice cold, cold as the depths, cold as river wine running through my throat on a hot summer evening. I sucked in a deep breath and shifted as a gnawing hunger began to race up through my body, between my legs and to my breast. I let out a low growl and stepped closer as he tightened his grip around my fingers. Please return to your cars, the voice interrupted, echoing through the loudspeakers. Startled by the intrusion, I let out a low curse. Alex licked his lips, but then let out a faint laugh. Time enough, love. There will be time enough. And with that, he let go of my hand. Come on, we have to get back to the car. Ooh. Grumbling, I followed him back. As I fastened my seatbelt, I took a few deep breaths to calm myself. Blue dragons aren't just emotional. We're also the most sensual of all dragons. Of course they are. We like sex and a lot of it, in all forms and aspects. My love life has been difficult. Being outcast was akin to being undesirable, and I spent a lot of time alone, not by choice. As I forced myself to relax, it hit me. I'd as good as told Alex I wanted to hook up with him. Well, obviously. Ralph seemed oblivious, still absorbed by the book he was reading. Alex gave me one last glance as the lights of the Clinton Pier appeared. He winked at me, and I let out a sigh, but grinned in return. As we disembarked, we drove onto what turned out to be a continuation of Highway 525 from over on the mainland. I reluctantly watched the water disappear behind us. How long is this? We can finish this. We could do this. That and God, the details. The town of Clinton on Whidbey Island was more a pit stop than anything else, and the Coupeville to Port Townsend ferry terminal was a good half-hour away. It was fully dark by now, and though the rain had let up, there wasn't much to see along the way except the road in the sweep of the Range Rover's headlights. I glanced back at Ralph, who had put away his e-reader and was now staring out the window, thoughtful look on his face. You okay? He nodded. Full moon was night before last. I'm still feeling a mild hangover. I went out to one of the pack sanctuaries and ran all night. What pack do you belong to? At one point Wolf had mentioned it, but I couldn't remember right now. Technically, I belong to the Glacial Peak Pack, although my family belongs to an urban offshoot, but most of my relatives belong to the GPs. Our sanctuary is near Monroe and welcome werewolves from a number of different clans. The only rules are 1. You respect others, and 2, the Glacial Peak pack makes the rules. He let out a sigh. I expected werewolves to be more insular. From what I'd heard, werewolf clans were usually up there with dragons for hierarchy and kowtowing. I shrugged. We're different, at least my family subgroup, in that we've broken a lot of traditional mores for werewolves. We have an alpha, yes, but women have full status in our pack, and we are making use of technology to keep track of our members. We also have a strong internal behavior monitoring program to keep an eye out for troublemakers, and we get them into therapy when it's deemed likely they can be helped. The modern world of humans has certainly shifted things for all of us. I leaned back against the headrest. Alex, what about vampires? I never thought to ask if you're aligned with anybody. Well, the big chief around here is Roman. He's Bloodwayne's son. She's the vampire queen, if you didn't know that. And Bloodwayne is determined that Brahms make inroads into being accepted in society. The Seattle Vampire Nexus is all about streamlining vampire-human relations. I finally joined even though I didn't want to. Manuela D'Artigo knew about me, and she's Roman's consort, although I think it's more of a business arrangement than anything. She's married to some werepuma, but if Roman discovered I was running a business without its official authority, I could be subject to expulsion from the area. So I caved and applied for a license. We're all legal now. He sounded slightly disgusted. I agree we need to learn to coexist, but I'm not sure how some humans are going to feel about this as time goes by. It's one thing when we're like the circus sideshow acts, quite another when we buy the house next door and set up shop in the town square. Yeah, that's why dragons aren't so out and about. It's one thing to know your next door neighbor is a werewolf, quite another to discover you're a landlord to a dragon who could not only destroy the entire apartment building but eat anybody in it. I was smart enough to keep my nature under wraps unless I knew I could trust someone. Stacey was used to suits. She wasn't threatened. On the other hand, there were enough hate groups around to make us all wary, and they weren't silent in their opposition to her existence. We were still debating on whether the world was ready for dragons when we arrived at a ferry terminal, but the line was huge, stretching far along the road. Alex frowned. You sure that we're good to go? Did we just miss the boat? There are a lot of cars lined up. Uh-oh, time to confess. I have to admit, I forgot to check on the sailing times for this ferry, but I figured they'd all still have a few this time of night, with commuters and all. Alex gave me a long look. And you didn't think to say anything before we got here? I'm sorry, okay? Look, there's one of the ferry guards coming along now. A woman dressed in uniform, sporting a Washington State Department of Transportation badge, was walking up to the driver's window. Alex rolled it down. Good evening, love. Are we in time for the next sailing? He smiled pleasantly, and I noticed his fangs were retracted. She nodded at him, and said, that depends. Do you have a reservation? Reservation? Alex didn't sound happy now. We need a reservations for a ferry trip? She shrugged. I'm sorry, but we always recommend reservations on this run. We run an average of 85% booked, and the remaining slots, if any, are first come, first serve. I can guarantee you that you won't make this sailing, or even the next two. They're booked solid, and the overflow from the waiting line here will fill them both up before you're near the boat. You might make the last sailing if you stay in line. I wanted to slide under my seat. How could I have made such a stupid mistake? Alex cleared his throat. You sure we need to make it to Port Townsend tonight? You can wait, but it might be quicker if you return to Milkitio, drive down to Edmonds, then take the ferry over to Kingston. Then you can drive to Port Townsend from there. Ours should probably get there at the same time as you would if you just parked here and waited. Alex thanked her and rolled up his window. He turned to me. Shimmer. I blushed again. I'm sorry I screwed up. I admit it, but there's not much I can do about it now. Oh, the idiotic. He let out a low growl, but it wasn't really a threat. I heard him use it often enough when dealing with Glenda. I let out a snort. Oh, stuff it. You should have checked yourself. Checked myself? All right, love, but remember, it was your idea. Again, the smart-ass grin, and he reached for his crotch, stopping as I swatted at his hand. Stop that. He laughed. I shook my head. Fine, it's all my fault. So what do we do now? Stay here or backtrack? He glanced back at Ralph, who was wisely keeping out of it. What do you think? Not my call. I'm just along for the ride. Ralph kept his stance as was Switzerland. All right, then. I don't feel like twiddling my thumbs on a possible chance of getting aboard a ferry tonight, so we're going to go back to Edmonds and take the ferry to Kingston like she suggested. He pulled out of the waiting line and headed back the way we'd come. I decided to join Ralph for a strategic game of keep my mouth shut. While Alex didn't seem all that angry, he definitely wasn't amused, and given the shift between us, I figured silence was golden. Not quite 2 hours later, we were in Edmonds looking for the ferry terminal. Numerous construction projects and road signs led us to a merry chase, but Ralph managed to navigate us around the chaos thanks to his GPS, and we looked out at pulling into the terminal just in time to drive right onto the ferry. No waiting. Ferry ride, take 3. But then it was 10:30. Thank God for that the ferries ran late, I thought, or I'd really have mucked things up. The ride was a little longer than the earlier one, and once again I stood out on the deck in the chill night, which was misting lightly. The pool was stronger now, but the wind and rain had picked it up. It quickened my blood and made me long to change shape. Suddenly I was aware that once again Alex was standing by my side. This time, however, the sparks between us kept themselves at bay. He leaned on the railing and stared at the water. Pretty, isn't it? Yeah, it's my element, my essence. I turned to him. Listen, I'm sorry I didn't check the schedule. I didn't like mucking things up. All my life I had learned that you screw up, you lose. Alex shrugged. It happens. Just a simple mix-up in the scheme of things. But next time, make certain you do the work. This time, it doesn't really matter. We'll be there late, but we'll get there. But then others are counting on you to come through. Forgetting your assignments can lead to disaster. You've never really had a job where you were part of a team, have you? He glanced sideways at me. Teamwork? When you're an outcast? Not so much. At the Lost and Foundling, it was every dragonette for herself. Survival depended on trusting yourself and only yourself. The wardens didn't care whether we lived or died, to be honest. They trained us, but if we fucked up, it was our own heads. And if you trusted somebody, chances were they'd double-cross you because the ones who did the best got the most food and the fewest beatings. Once I was on my own, I walked away and didn't look back. I never had to learn how to work with anybody before. I shivered remembering those hard Scrabble days. I swore nobody would ever get a leg up on me. If I could help it, I guess. I'm used to fending for myself. I won't fail you again. You'll pick it up. Just remember, do the work when you need help, ask. When you screw up, tell me first thing. Everything will be all right. He reached out to gently wipe the rain, which was now slashing down around us, out of my eyes. Grateful for his understanding, I leaned my cheek against his palm and traced his finger down my cheek. We'll be pulling into the dock soon. From there, it's a hop, skip, and a jump up to Port Townsend. But as he turned, he paused. I had a feeling he wanted to say something else. What is it? Just this. The Olympic Peninsula is home to a lot of spirits. Not all of them are ghosts. Dragons or not, you don't want to be running around without somebody with you. Don't wander off alone when we get there. Take Rolf with you. If it's daytime, take me when it's night. Trust me, it's not a place you want to tangle with. The forest is ancient, very much alive. As he spoke, it was as if I could feel the presence of the approaching land descend around us. I looked up to see that we were pulling into the terminal, and right then, an overwhelming feeling of otherness hit me. Alex was right. This was not a place to get lost from the pack, as Rolf would say. Because even if you were the odd person out, I had a distinct feeling that you wouldn't ever be alone. And right now, I knew that some of the beasties out there had razors edged to them, sharp, shiny, and waiting to slice open a vein. Okay, I would think this would be a much shorter chapter if we didn't have to read all the freaking details of all the highways and all this random ass information. Come on, just get to the point, which is what we're waiting for, right? Anyway, this wraps up chapter 3. I think chapter 4 we're going to have to split in 2. Yes, we'll have to split it in 2, but that's for next week. Enjoy this rainy Wednesday, and I'll see you next time.